Oh, wait, I actually have a car blocking my car. I have two guests staying by me, and they blocked my car. So I have to get hold of their keys and move them with the shower. Okay, so Kelim Gemara. Tanurabon. Minay lebachar shenachal l'shnei yomim v'layla. How do you know that a bechor is eaten in the same time that a shlomim is eaten? Shenemar uvesorim yilacha kachazeh atnufa ucheshoik hayamin. The kishu akotzav l'chazav v'shoik. There is a Hekash from the basar of the bechor, or to the basar of a bechor, from the chazav the shoik of a shlomim. And notice that it's not a Hekash from shlomim to bechor; it's a Hekash from specifically the chazav the shoik of the shlomim to bechor. Ma shlomim nechol l'shnei yom v'layla echad, af bechor nechol l'shnei yom v'layla echad. If you remember, Rashi spoke out of the Mishnah. I believe Rashi said in the Mishnah. And how do you know that Bechor is Nechal L'Shnei Yom V'Layla Echad? We know that from the limud that we're going to see in the Gemara, which we just learned. But Meiser Lo Yodanim Ehecha. Rashi says Meiser. I still have no clue where we know that Meiser can be eaten L'Shnei Yom V'Layla Echad. So this is what Rashi was referring to. This is at least how we know that Bechor is eaten for Shnei Yomim and Laila. This was the same question that was asked of the Chachamim in Kerem B'Yavne. Bechor lekamonechel. How long are you allowed to eat the Bechor? And then the Reb Tarfon the Amar. So Reb Tarfon answered the question. Yomim l'shnei Yomim v'Laila echad. Hayisham Talmud echad shebelavs medrash. There was a Talmud that today was his first day in yeshiva, and he heard this discussion, and he jumped up. You know what his name was? Rabbi Yosy Aglili Shemai. So Rabbi Yosy Aglili was a bold guy. Usually the first day you come to yeshiva, you're quiet and you see what's going on, but he jumped right up the first day. Tell me if I'm wrong. I think that's what Rashi says. It means, Rashi actually comments on Shabbalah b'samedrash tchila. So I think that means it was his first day in yeshiva. What does the article say? And so basically it was his first day in yeshiva. Okay. And he said, Amar Loi, Rabbi, how do you know this? Amar Loi, B'ni Shalomim Kalchim Kalam. So he wasn't told the Hekash to Chazav V'Shoik. He was told a binyanav. Shlomim Kadishim Kalam. Ubechar Kadishim Kalam. Let's make a binyanav. Ma Shlomim Nechol L'Shnei Yomim V'Layla Echad. Bechar Nechol L'Shnei Yomim V'Layla Echad. So now we have Sai Hekash from Chazav V'Shoik of the Shlomim to the Bechar, and now we have a binyanav. Amaloi Rebbe. So Rabbi Yosef told Rebbe, what are you talking about? If you're making through a binyanav, I can suggest an alternative binyanav. Bechor matana l'koyin. Bechor is given to the koyin. The chatas v'osham matana l'koyin. U'machatas v'osham l'yoyim v'layla, just like a chatas and osham, which are matana l'koyin, are only eaten for one day and the following night. Af bechor l'yoyim v'layla should also be eaten only for the day and the following night. Amrullah, they told him. Amalek told him, no, when you want to make a binyanav, you have to compare comparables. So nidin davar mitoch davar, v'nilma davar ma shlomim ein boin al chet. Compare shlomim to bechor, and don't compare bechor to chatas and osham. Why? Because just like the shlomim doesn't come for a chet, it's just a neder and a davar. Af bechor ein a bal chet. Yes, bechor is mandatory, but it doesn't come machmas a chet. So therefore, let's compare it to a shlomim. Ma shlomim nechol l'shnei yomim v'layla echad. Af bechor nechol l'shnei yomim v'layla echad. Amar Loi, Rebbe. He said, Rebbe, why would you say that? Say differently. Nidin davar v'davar, yilami davar v'davar, chatas v'osham, matana l'koyin, u'bechor matana l'koyin. You all have a comparable. So you picked the comparable of Ba'achet. I'm going to pick a comparable of Matana L'Koyin. Machadas Vashim Mein Boin B'Neder V'Nidava. Apechor L'Koyin Ubechor Matana L'Koyin. I think I went back some lines. Not well. Chadas Vashim Matana L'Koyin Ubechor Matana L'Koyin. Machadas Vashim Mein Boin B'Neder V'Nidava. Apechor Eine B'Neder V'Nidava. They have another similarity that they're not B'Neder V'Nidava. And therefore, let's say, in other words, Rabbi Yosy clearly asked on the establishment, why is it that you're learning a binyan av from Shlomim? Why don't you learn a binyan av from Chatas Vashim? Chavat Rabbi Akiva when the Stalak Rab Tarfon. Rabbi Akiva jumped up to get into the conversation, and Rabbi Tarfon stepped back. Amaloi, Rabbi Akiva said, Hareyu Omer uvesoram yiyalacha. It's not a binyan av, it's a Hekash. And therefore, you look at where the Hekash is from. And the Hekash is not from Osham and Chatos. The Hekash is from the Chaz of a Shoik, of a Shlomim to the Bechar. Uvesoram yiyalacha Hekashin akasav l'chaz of a Shoik shal Shlomim. Ma Shlomim nechalim l'shnei yomim v'layla echad, af b'char nechal l'shnei yomim v'layla echad. Amaloi, so he told him back, Hikshasai l'chaz of a Shoik shal Shlomim. You're telling me about it's a Hekash, so you don't compare it to Asham and Chatos, you compare it to a Shlomim. But it doesn't say in the pasuk that it's the Chaz of a Shoik of a Shlomim that we're comparing it to. Let's see what it says over here. It says, by Bechor, Uvesarim Yilacha, Kechazei Atnuva, Chashoik Hayomim. And you're assuming it means the Chaz of a Shoik of a Shlomim. You know what? There's other Karbanos that require a Chaz of a Shoik. And you know what that is? It's a carbon taida. So Rabbi Yosy literally answered back, Hikshasei l'chaz of a Shoik shal Shlomim, but v'anima kishay l'chaz of a Shoik shal taida. Ma taida nechelas l'yoyim v'layla, af b'char nechal l'yoyim v'layla. So now we've neutralized the whole Hekash. Because Behechadesi, the Hekash is referring to Shlomim, maybe the Hekash is referring to taida. Now you see the significance in the fact that it's just a Hekash to Chaz of a Shoik. It's not a Hekash directly to a carbon Shlomim. Amaloi, so he answered him back, if you look at the pasuk, and then the pasuk repeats itself. Why did the Torah repeat itself with the l'chayiyah? At the end, why does it add a second l'chayiyah at the end? The Torah is telling you about Bechar that it's yours twice. Why does it l'choyah twice? To add a second day. So now we have a limud where it's mentioned specifically by Bechar, the extra l'choyah to tell you that you can eat the basar of the Bechar, the kohen that is, can eat the basar of the Bechar for an extra day. When this conversation was reported to Rabbi Shmuel about the extra l'chayiyah, and that's the reason why you're not makish it to Toida, you're makish the Bechor to a Shlomim. Amr lehen, he told them, Tzu v'amru loyla Rabbi Akiva, tell Rabbi Akiva that the fact that you had to come on to this l'chayiyah is a mistake. Toisa, because you could not have learned it from Toida anyway. Why not? Because Toida mehechel lomda. How do you know this man achila by Toida? Mishlomim. You know it from a shlomim. V'chidavar halamed behekesh. Toizer umalamed behekesh. You couldn't have made anyway a hekesh from Bechor to Toida because the whole makor of Toida is only shlomim, and therefore, but it's still learned through shlomim, and we'll see how that works. So, to be very clear, the Siman Achila for a Toida is taka only one day, and that's enforced by Toida itself. But the fact that the Toida needs Chaz of a Shoik, that you only learn out of Shlomim. So we're not making a Hekash directly to Toida, directly to Shlomim. We're making a Hekash to Chaz of a Shoik. Chaz of a shoik by a taida is only a davar halamid min a hekesh, and therefore you cannot learn from taida. You could only learn from shlamim where there's no hekesh there. The halacha of chaz of a shoik and shnei yamim v'layla echad is all mufurish by shlamim. So therefore, you don't need your lechayiyah by bechor to teach you the second day. You could rely completely on the hekesh. Let's see Rashi. Ein alecha l'doyne b'loshen achron lehakesha l'chazav v'shoik shel taida ela k'loshen rishon l'shel shlamim. So not like what I said that loshen achron is the lechayiyah. Don't compare it to the taida. Compare it to the shlam. Okay. Zog to Gemara. Rabbi Shmuel hi lechayiyah my avotay. Rabbi Kiva was using lechayiyah to tell you that a bechor can be eaten for 2 days. But Rabbi Shmuel just made it quite clear that that's not necessary. The only hakish we have is to shlamim, and therefore we know anyway that bechor can be eaten for 2 days. So now what is that extra lechayiyah for? These are going to start sounding familiar. Limit al bechor balmum shahu matana lekayin. That's how we know that a bechor balmum goes to the kohen. You don't find anywhere in the Torah that even a carbon that's a balmum retains a kedusha that still goes to the kohen. But if someone gives any other carbon and it becomes a balmum, he's pointed and he gets it back. Here, even though it's a balmum, it goes to the kohen. So that's a unique halacha that applies to bechor. L'chayiyah belongs to the kohen. Say if it's a tam and it's brought as a carbon, l'chayiyah belongs to the kohen. Say if it's a balmum. Rabbi Kiva Yolaflei, and this that the kohen gets to keep the behema if it's a balmum opens up a huge parsha, because now the way it used to be is if someone had a bechor born to him, he wouldn't want to have a carbon with the kedusha's carbon had kedusha mirechem all along. Who wants that? That's the danger. You'll be moil. So he would quickly deliver to the kohen, even after the Beis Hamikdash was charav. Nobody wanted to have a carbon in his midst, so he delivered it straight to the kohen. Now, at that point, it's in the best interest of the kohen for that animal to become a balmum, because it's a grenade if it's kadosh. The moment it's a balmum, it's a windfall, because now he has an animal that he can eat. So there was always a chash that the kohen would purposely inflict a mum in the carbon. So the Gemara discusses when you could trust the kohen and how that works. Anyway, Zok Gemara of Rabbi Kiva, Yolaflei mi besarim. How does Rabbi Kiva know that even the balmum goes to kohen? He learns it from besaram plural, chad tam v'chad balmum. Rabbi Shmuel, how does he explain the word besaram? Mi besaram dahanach b'chayres ka'amar. Now, this sounds like it's just an abstract discussion, but we had this discussion in great detail when we learned the sugya earlier, and we alluded to it yesterday as well. It says, remember we said yesterday that by Bechor, it says, by Bechor it says, Damam and Chelbam. We had that just yesterday. Let me see if I can find it. It's on the Vav, actually. We had two mahalchim of I think between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Yosy Aglili how to darshan these psukim. So it says Ach b'chor shor, oy b'chor kesef, oy b'chor eis loy sifta koydashem es damam tizrak al mizbech ves chelbam taktir. So we had a shayla. Does damam and chelbam refer to the carbon pesach and meiser as well, which is what the Gemara told us yesterday, and that's how we know that the Korban Pesach and Bechor, you're makriv the dam on the Mizbech, similar to that of the Bechor, and you are makriv the makter, the chalavim and the murim on the Mizbech. Is that what you learn out of it? We had another shita that we quoted yesterday, that we also had a couple of blot ago, that says the way you know that there's rikas dam by the Korban Pesach is from a lashon of shvicha. It says dam zevachecha yishafei. Right, so there was a shiloh that's carbon pesach needs rikas dam, where you stand at a distance from the Mizbeach and throw the dam from the Mizrach, or are you at point blank range and you're just pouring it down the wall of the Mizbeach? Remember, we had a sugya that shvicha is a form of zrika, but zrika is not a form of shvicha. We had that discussion. That was all we were discussing these psukim. So if damam is not referring to the carbon pesach, and if it's not referring to Meiser in this pasuk, what is damam and chabam referring to? So the Gemara said maybe it's referring to the different types of animals, shor, bechor, kesef, and eis. Now the next pasuk after that was uvesarim yelacha. So the Gemara wanted to know, what is Visaram referring to? If you learn Damam and Chalbam is referring to Meiser and Carbon Pesach, what is Visaram referring to? So the Gemara said Visaram means Echad Tam Vechad Balmum. But according to the first Yid, Visaram could also mean the basar of the A's, the different types of korbanos that it could have been. So the machlokes that we reminded ourselves of yesterday really continues today a little. Okay, Zok to Gemara weiter. Now we're going to get a little bit technical. It just means from those bechayers that we were discussing in the previous pasuk, depending on what the animal was made out of. Zok to Gemara b'may community. So what is the machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva? Whether there would have been an option to learn Bechar from Torah. Rabbi Shmuel stated that you couldn't learn from Torah because you're learning from something that was only learned from a Hekash, but Rabbi Kiva didn't have that problem. Why, according to Rabbi Kiva, would it have been possible, would it have been feasible to learn it from Torah? Is it not Lilmud Mehekash? The whole fact that a chaz of a shoik of the Torah is given to the Kohen, and there's a tnufa made, isn't that all only learned from a Hekesh? So what was Rabbi Kiva's thought to pass that on to Bechor? Zok Gemara, I'll tell you why. Because this isn't a pure Hekesh, because let's think about it. The Yom V'Laila, that's mefurish by Torah, right? It says mefurish by Torah that it's eaten for one day and one night, as Mati asked, right? It's only the fact that it needs a chaz of a shoik that is learned from Shlomim. So it's really learning something with a Hekesh that's not mamish completely learned through a Hekesh. It's only partially learned from a Hekesh. So that's the Gemara Shaila. Hey menu v'davar achar. The machlokes is mar savar hey menu v'davar achar have a Hekesh. Rabbi Shmuel held it doesn't make a difference if it says mefurish liyoim v'layla echad by Toida, but lemaisa. The limud is not from Toida. The limud is from Chazav V'Shoik, and Chazav V'Shoik is not mentioned anywhere by Toida. You only know it from a Shlomim, and therefore you wouldn't be able to teach that to Bechor. But Umar Sover, what Rabbi Kiva held, Lo have a Hekesh. I don't call that a Hekesh. The fact that it mentions Mufurish L'Yom V'Layla Echad by a Toida is enough that we'll consider the knowledge even of a Chazav V'Shoik by a Toida is not a Davar Nimel with a Hekesh, and therefore can be passed on to Bechor through a Hekesh. If you hold it's not a Hekesh, and therefore you could pass it on with a Hekesh, which is Rabbi Kiva. So now we're talking about a different sugya where you have a similar arrangement where we're passing on through a Hekesh something that was partially learned through a Hekesh and was partially mufurish. The Chenyasa Lo Moed is a pasuk in the Avodah of Kippur. It says V'chibur ala kodesh mitumash b'nei Yisrael u'mipeshayim l'chol chatoisam v'chenyasa lo moed hashoich anita b'soich tanosam. This is referring to the matnas dam that are made on Yom Kippur. So we learned on Yom Kippur, where are the matnas dam put? First of all, there's two sets of zrikas that are lefnai ulefnim, right? There's a set of zrikas by the kapyrus on the mizbeach, on the Aron Kodesh, and then there's another set of zrikas. There's one set of zrikas in the Kodesh Kodeshim, but it's achas l'mayla v'sheva l'mata, right? We know it's achas l'mayla v'sheva l'mata. Those are matas dam that you do in the Kodesh Kodeshim, and then you go out into the Heichel, and the Kohen Gadol went out into the Heichel, and again did achas l'mayla v'sheva l'mata on the Pareiches, and then he made zrika on the Mizbeach Hazor. How do we know that? We know that from V'chiper al HaKodesh V'tumus B'nai Yisrael M'Peshem L'Chachatoisam. That learned out of a Hekash. And we say as follows. The Gemara says, Kishem Shemaza L'fnayu L'fnim Achas L'mayla V'sheva L'mata. Just like when they spritzed by the Aron Kodesh inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Kodesh spritzed Achas L'mayla and Sheva L'mata, Midam HaPar. They did it from the Midam HaPar and from the Dam HaSir. Kach Maza B'Heichel. They did the same thing in the Heichel, Achas L'mayla V'sheva L'mata. Uchashem Shelafnai V'Lefnim Achas L'mayla V'sheva L'mata Midam HaSir. But at Dam HaSir they did the same thing. Kach Maza B'Heichel. So how do we know that it was Achas L'mayla V'sheva L'mata in the Heichel, aside from the Dam of the Par, aside from the Dam of the Seir? You only know it from a Hekash, right? But the problem is, how do you know that the base Kodesh HaKodeshim, aside from the Dam of Par, and aside from the Dam of Seir, they spritzed Achas L'mayla V'sheva L'mata? And you'd be surprised to know that it doesn't say Achas L'mayla V'sheva L'mata Mefurish in the Torah about the Dam of Par, by the Aron Kodesh, and it doesn't say Beferish Achas L'mayla V'sheva L'mata, but the Dam of Seir in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. You only know those two from a Hekash. So if you only know those two from a Hekash, how could you learn a Hekash to tell you that you do the same thing in the Heichel? Now, what does it say Mufurish? It says Mufurish by the Dam HaPar Sheva L'mata, but not Achas L'mayla. And by the Dam HaSir it says Beferish Achas L'mayla, but not Sheva L'mata. So you need the Dam HaPar learns from the Dam HaSir the Achas L'mayla. The Dam HaSeir learns from the Dam HaPar the Sheva L'mata, L'fnai V'L'fnim. So inside the Dam HaPar, inside the Dam HaSeir, that you know the whole set of Achas L'mata V'Sheva L'mata is relying on the Hekash from one from the other. So then how can you take that Hekash and now teach that it does the same thing, that you do the same thing in the Heichel? So that's a Hekash from Hekash. But the original Hekash is only partly a Hekash, because each one, the Par and Seir, says some Beferish. So that's Heimenu V'Dover Achar. You learned the Achas L'mayla V'sheva L'mata. Some of it is Mefurish. Some of it is learned through a Hekash from Power from Seir. And now you want to pass it on with a Hekash. So Zok Gemara B'Chenyas Lo Yemoyit Kishem Shemaz L'Fnai V'L'Fnim Achas L'mayla V'sheva L'mata Midam HaPar Kach Maza B'Heichel U'Chishem Sh'L'Fnai V'L'Fnim Achas L'mayla V'sheva L'mata Midam HaSeir Kach Maza B'Heichel. Elamandam have a Hekash. If you hold it's a Hekash, so you can't learn it again. And therefore, how do you know this halacha by the Heichel Michael Meimar? So let's quickly look at Rashi. Rashi looks at it very nicely. Zokt Rashi. Gufei achas l'mayla v'sheva l'mata b'par b'sir. How do you know it? Through a heimenu v'davar achagamar. The b'pnim l'mayla b'par b'pnim the achas l'mayla by the par like siv b'minyana. Doesn't say there's rikas l'mayla, but it doesn't say how many. The pasuk says v'yizav etzboi al pnei akapayos kedma, but it doesn't say how many times. The lefnei which is the Sheva L'mata, he has the Sheva Pamim. So the Achas L'mayla just says there's a Zrika, it doesn't say how many. But the Sheva L'mata is specified. The Sheva L'mata d'chsiva bei. But with the Ir Chatos, it's the opposite. L'mayla d'chsiva. It only mentions how many you spritz L'mayla. Because it says V'hiza Oisoi. Oisoi means one. Ala Kaparis v'lefnei Kaparis. Oisoi Chadam Ashma. But v'lefnei Kaparis like Siv Sheva. So again, by the Par, it speaks out the Sheva L'mata. By the Seir, it speaks out the Achas L'mayla. Ugemiri b'Hekesha b'Adodi, and they learned from each other using a Hekesh. So the Torah is makish the Dam HaSeir to the Dam HaPar. Alma avoidis Par v'Seir b'Fnim is behemenu v'davar achi alpina. The mitzvahs avoida kolachad ksuva boy u'mitzvah lavan v'chaveirei. Right? Each one, the Par and the Seir, only some of its avoida is detailed. Some of it must be learned from its friend. And then v'hadar migmar heichel mifnim be'akesha dechen yasa lo yalmoyed. Alma haimenu v'davar acher lafka kesha chashav, and therefore you can make the Hekash. Zok to Gemara. So ma'ikal meimer, if you hold like Rabbi Shmuel, it's not a good Hekash. How was he going to explain this Hekash by Yom Kippur? Zok to Gemara, because mekaybes hu gemir me'adoni. It's not a dover ad nilmud beHekash. You're passing with the Hekash. Because we're learning something else. One is a limud on matnas dam, that's some part of the ear, and then we're learning a separate Hekash that the Heichel has the same din as the Kodesh Kodeshim. It's a different type of Hekash. Zok Rashi. The Behekesh kama behemois ispish. We're comparing the part to the Sehir. We're just comparing the hekel to the Kodesh Kodshim. But in our case, where Rabbi Shmuel said it wouldn't be a good hekesh, it's the choshev v'shoik itself that the hekesh is on, and therefore the hiatma made the mishlomim a hekesh, and you only know choshev v'shoik by toida through a hekesh from shlomim. Gewaltig. Zog to Gemara weiter. The Yosy, or you could say a different svara, not mekoymos, but you have a different distinction between our case of toida, where Rabbi Shmuel does not allow it, and the case of Yom Kippur, where Rabbi Shmuel does allow it. The Yosy put mipnim bechad zimna gomir. It's a one huge hekesh, and therefore it's not a problem. What does this mean? Look, Rashi, very, very interesting. The nami, the hekesh mekoymos kehekesh behemos. Let's say you don't want to accept our first pshat, and you said, I don't care if it's hekesh mekoymos, it's still a davar hanilmud min hekesh, you're passing on through a hekesh. But hoil the hekesh, look at the base, so we get the gears right. Hoil the hekesh behemos kehekesh mekoymos, since as we're saying that it doesn't make a difference, it's still a davar hanilmud min hekesh, you're passing on with the hekesh. The hekesh behemos kehekesh mekoymos. Hoil the hekesh behemos tzorech pnim hu afilu hachi loydami lohudla. Even though you want to say that we're not going to make that distinction, that hekesh mekoymos is different, you still have a good reason to explain why you could make the hekesh. Why? The ilu heichel kula milsa boy lemelach mipnim. We're not just learning achas lamayla or shavalamata in the heichel. We need to learn the whole idea that you make zrikas. You're learning the whole thing. Punct, one detail of it is this achas lamayla, this shavalamata. But the whole concept of zrika, we're learning out of the hekesh. That's mefurish. The main hekesh, it's mefurish by the lefnai lefnim. It's mefurish in the Torah that there are zrikas lefnai lefnim by the power by the seer. The main hekesh is good. Your complaint is there's one feature, one detail in the hekesh that happened to be linked with the hekesh that I'm not worried about. If the main hekesh is good, then we'll take all of the different details with it. Zokt Rashi, v'aydi the nit hekesh lidorish b'dvarim hamefurajim b'fnim. Even though you don't have the exact numbers, once you have a base hekesh, then you could also import all the details. We'll also learn the details that are taked var manim behekesh. So it's a huge chiddush. That you say something you do with hekesh, you can't pass on with hekesh. That's only if that is the focus of your hekesh. But if the hekesh is for another big halacha, and this is just a detail, that will come along with the hekesh. So how come we can't apply that same principle to toida, and bechor? We're learning the whole concept of shnayam v'la'lechad, which is mefurish by toida. So this is a little pitch of by the cause of a shoik. Dr. Rashi v'gab hegesh to lil nami because of a toida v'hukish bechor latoida lil moid loy cause of a shoik ulamitcha ulamdasa behekesh. If the hekesh would not have been on chazav v'shoy, but the hekesh would have been on the main halacha of how long it could be eaten for, that would be okay. If the main hekesh was to teach you from Shalomim or from Bechor, from Toida to Bechor, that would have been fine, and we would have learned Chazav V'Shoik as well. Because the main hekesh was just the Yom V'Layla. Which is mufurish by the carbon Toida, Melamedes Nami Olav Tnubas Chazav V'Shoik, which is only from a hekesh. But that's not what you have over here. The Torah never made a hekesh to Toida from Bechor. Only a Chazav V'Shoik should be Toida. So that's why it's so important to note that the hekesh here is not from Toida or from Shlomim to Bechor, it's from the Chazav V'Shoik. And therefore the main hekesh is a Davar HaNilmud B'Hekesh, and that's why Zot Rabbi Shmuel, you wouldn't be able to pass it on. Gewaltig. Zot Gemara weiter. The Bach says, Lo have a hekesh. Bishlam, if it's not hekesh, means like Rabbi Kiva. Hani d'chsev mi moish v'yseichem toviu lechem tenufa. Rashi says, Gabi shtei alechem datzeres ksiv. Here we're talking about the shtei alechem. By the shtei alechem, the Torah says very clearly how big the lechamim, the breads that are brought by the kivsei atzeres, exactly how big they have to be. Yesterday, Moshe Weinberg asked me, how do you know how much each bread has to be? So this is the makar of how you know how big each bread has to be. And now all it should have said is lechem. It doesn't need to say taviu. So the word taviu is a completely extra word. Why is the word taviu mentioned? To teach us that kol sha'ata mevi mimakam achar hareyu kazeh. Any time in the Torah where there's a chiyuv to bring lechamim that are made out of chametz, because the lachmei toida are made out of chametz. Anytime you find anywhere in the Torah where you need to bring a lechem that's made out of chametz, such as in a korban toida, one of the four lechamim is chametz, hareyu kazeh, it has to be the same shear, the same size as the lechamim that are brought by the kivsei atzeres, which is the shtei alechem. Mal halon isarin lachala. By the parsha of kivsei atzeres, the Torah specifically says that each challah, meaning each bread, has to be made out of an isarin, a flour. Afkan isarin lechala. So now we know that the 10 lechamim of chametz that were brought as one of the items in the korban toida was made out of 10 isarinim, one isarin per bread. Zok to Gemara, if you're going to compare it to the kivsei atzeres, imal halon shnei asroinim, afkan shnei asroinim, maybe you learn the two lechamim by the shtei alechem were a total of 2 asroinim. So who said you learn one yisrael per challah? Maybe you learn that the total amount should be shnei asroinim, and therefore, if you're bringing 10 challahs out of 2 asroinim, each challah will only be 1/5 of an isarin. Talmud loimer tihiyena. Tells you tihiyena that each one has to be an isarin. V'lamadnu asara lechametz. That's how we know that out of the 4 breads that are brought by our korban toida, the 10 that are chametz are 1 isarin each, because it says tihiyena and it says taviu. So if you look at the lashon pasuk, because mimosh paisechem taviu lechem tenufa shnei asorim soiles, and then there's tihiyena again. Tihiyena tells us that each one has, I guess it's extra, so each one has to be an isarin. Now that tells us the size of each of the breads that are chametz. But there's another 30 breads that are brought by a toida that are matzah. How do you know they also have to be an isarin each? V'lamadnu asar lechametz, asar lematzah minayin. Talmud loimer al chalas lechem chametz, and we learn from there is neget chametz havei matzah. So by the parsha of the Toida, it says al chalas lechem chametz yaakov karbanoi al zevach toida shlomo. We learn through a Hekash that the same shear that you need to have for the lechamim of chametz, you also need to have for the lechamim of matzah. So here it's a davar hanilmud min a Hekash. How do you know bichlal that the lechamim of chametz have to be in the isarin? From taviu, which is like a Hekash from Toida. So if it's a Hekash from Toida, how could you then pass that on through a Hekash to the lechamim that are matzah by the korban toida? If you learn that the first thing is not a Hekash, then you're good to go, because we're just learning a detail. But if you're going to learn that it's complete Hekash, what are you going to do? Elamandamar have a Hekash, Michael Meimar, Zoktimar, over there it's not a Hekash. Taviu Yiseri. Not learned that a Hekash, it's learned that of a Yitir Loshen. There's a Yitir Loshen mentioned in the parsha of Kivsei Atzeres, in the parsha of the Shei Lechem. The extra word. That extra word makes it ki'ilu, it's written begufay. The Baltic. Zok to Gemara, Taviu Rebiu Zakrashi, Larabi Schomet Shibetoida, Shekol Shtaim Shaboy, Yiu Shtaim Esrainim. In other words, it's 1 isarin per bread. Now the command of Siv Begufay Belachme Toida. It's as if it's mufurish by the lachmei toida that the ones that are chametz have to be made out of an isarin each. V'lav mishtei alechem gamri, we don't consider that to have been learned out from mishtei alechem. V'hechidami l'lahav himenu v'davar acher. So when would it be himenu v'davar acher? Kagoyni ishkish chametz the toida l'shtei alechem b'krachrina the lemefarish b'yisarin l'chala. If the Hekash would have been stamazoi, not in a pasuk, that mentions the extra word, so then I would say it's a regular Hekash. But since we're learning the halacha from the extra word itself, that's something that's not considered having been learned. The Hekash will apply the extra word of Taviu directly to the Chalais of Chometz, and therefore it's not a Dover Anilmus in the Hekash. Gewalt. That took us off on a little of a tangent of Heimen of Dover Acher. Is that considered a Hekash, and therefore you cannot learn it from another Hekash? So we have a Machlokes, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva, and all the kashas that we added Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel showed that those cases are not Heimen of Dover Acher. They're considered Mineu Bei. There's a lot of restrictions on when a Pesach can be eaten. It's only Nechal Balayla. So that's what we're going to focus on. So I touched wrongfully in the Mishnah. I touched that like all the other karbanos that we learned so far, that really you can eat it a whole night midiraisa, and at chatzois is the rabbanon to keep somebody far away from doing an aveir. Right? That's why I touch it. So the Gemara tells me that I'm dead wrong. Man Tana, who is the Tana that holds that midiraisa the zaman achilas Pesach is only until chatzois? Omer Rabbi Yosy, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. The Tanya Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer. Nemer kan balayla hazeh. It says balayla hazeh by the achilas haPesach. V'nemer lahalon v'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim balayla hazeh. Malalon at chatzois. When did HaKadosh Baruch Hu kill the b'choros? Chatzois. Chatzois mamish. Afkan at chatzois the zaman achilas hakorban Pesach is until chatzois and not past chatzois. So midaraisa you cannot eat the korban Pesach past chatzois. Omer Rabbi Kiva v'alak parnemar. Doesn't it also say about the Achilas HaPesach, V'achaltem Yosy b'chipazon, meaning Achas chipazon? When are you supposed to rush? You're supposed to rush in the morning to leave Mitzrayim. The chipazon was all in the morning because they left Mitzrayim in the morning. But Etzem Hayom Hazeh. So Adrabah, Zman Achilas HaPesach is all the way until daybreak. I'm sorry. Zaktim Mori Im Kain. Why did it say Balayla? I would have thought I would have thought that the korban Pesach, like every other korban, you could eat it the day that you're makriv it, and then the following night. So maybe the korban Pesach, the Zman Achila, already starts Pesach in the afternoon. Who said you have to wait till nightfall to begin eating the korban Pesach? Talmud Leimer Balayla Yehinechal Veinechal Bayoy. So that Balayla you're saying means you could only eat it by night until Chatzois. That's not true. That's just to tell you that that's when you begin eating it. So Zok Gemara. So we have a machlokes Tanoim, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah who holds midaraisa you stop by Chatzois, and Rabbi Kiva who holds that midaraisa you can eat it a whole night. So Amalei Abai Umimai de Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah udaraisa. Why are you learning that our Mishnah is referring to a daraisa and it's going to hold Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? Why don't you learn like the rest of the pair? Dilma derabanon ulaharchik min aveira. Why don't you touch it like I touched it and say that it's only midirabanon that you have to stop at chatzois, but meikar din you can eat it all night? The Gemara kazim kain my ella at chatzois. The Mishnah expresses it by korban Pesach differently than the Mishnah expresses it elsewhere. By all the other Mishnahs it says v'nechal at chatzois. Here it says einay nechal ella at chatzois. It's a much stronger lotion. That means that the zman achil is only until chatzois midaraisa. And therefore, our Mishnah clearly holds who holds midaraisa, you have to stop eating the korban Pesach by Chatois. Baruch Hashem, we finished his on the Kaiman. We can believe later. We can go straight to Pesach Zimra. Okay, Gaval. Image have an awesome day. Bishop, tomorrow we're starting the new parak. Today they were nice to us, is that they finished the parak at the end of the page, so you only have to get a new Gemara tomorrow. Do you have to need a new volume? I need a new volume tomorrow.